welcome to a multitude of counselors. We're so thankful that you joined us today for our program called My Grief Observed. My Grief Observed. Our guest today is Mike Tucker, someone whose preaching I have enjoyed for many years, and I have to say that there's a certain warmth to the way he preaches that makes me feel like he has just hugged the entire congregation with the love of a father. It's just something really special about it. And the other thing is that I could tell even before I knew factually and had asked him that he had been in counseling. And not that you'd been in counseling, sorry.
You know, both may be true.
Yeah, exactly. But that he was a counselor, and then that was, of course, verified recently. Counseling changes the way you think and the way you are, and you never see things quite the same after you've counseled people, and that's true, and it comes through in your preaching, and I've been really blessed by it over the years. And I'm sure that in the course of your ministry, you have counseled many people through grief, true?
Yeah, absolutely. Used to teach grief recovery when I was working as a chaplain. So,
right.
Yeah, it's a topic that I was versed in academically, obviously, and experientially as a counselor. But when you go through it yourself, it's interesting too.
And that's why we're calling it My Grief Observed. And I just want to open with a couple thoughts. There are many theories of grief, and probably the most popular is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And she came up with a theory, and by the way, she initially formulated her theory for people who were dying. Her book was called On Death and Dying, but they realized that it applied to people that were losing people as well. And she broke grieving down into 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I think there's some logic to that. But people have objected to that and any formula for grieving simply because it isn't that tameable of an animal. It cannot be, corralled into distinct stages as if it's a task on a list that you check off. And that may be the very thing about grief that kind of makes it special in a way, because it's so very inconvenient. If you look at human life as something that's functional, grief really has no function to it. But that's the very thing about it that makes it, it proves that we are made in the image of a God who grieves. And God grieves because God is love. And you cannot truly love without truly grieving someone you lose. But that grieving is extremely inconvenient. It serves no functional purpose. You just do it because it's part of that love. And we, made in God's image, also grieve because it's part of the fact that we love. And I know that you have a story about your own story of grieving, losing your wife recently. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that. Just give us the background and launch into the story.
Gail and I were married, as I told you before, 40 years, 3 months, 13 days, and 3 hours.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
40 years, okay.
3 months, 13 days, and 3 hours. And it's amazing how, you take the time to count that up when it's been that significant of a relationship. She was by far my very best friend, and the person with whom I was most intimate emotionally, spiritually, every other way. We shared ministry together. We traveled together. We did everything together. We had preached together. We wrote books together. You name it. We've done television together, all of it together. 95% of our time was spent together. And so when she got sick, which happened rather suddenly because she was 60 years old and still playing volleyball every week, diving across gym floors to dig a ball, she incredible health. And then boom, we had the first symptom, which was actually symptoms of a stroke. And what happened is she had pancreatic cancer that was stage 4. It already spread to the liver, which created a symptom, a condition they call sticky blood. And it created a clot in her thigh. And every time one of those clots broke through, it gave her a stroke, which was the first inkling that we had that anything was wrong with her at all.
Was it a real stroke or just looked like a stroke?
It was a real stroke because the blood clot went to her brain.
Wow. So it was the
and so she lost use of the right hand for a time because of that. Oh. Eventually, one stroke took away her sight. She lost the ability to tell the difference by feel between a wool sweater and a silk blouse. Wow. She just couldn't tell. She knew she had something but couldn't tell. And so the first symptom came on March 3. We were in Vancouver, British Columbia, doing a Mad About Marriage. She'd made a presentation even that way in high heels for 3.5 hours in the afternoon, 4 hours. No one could tell anything was wrong. The next day, on March 6th, I got her back to Dallas, and when we landed, I said, which hospital do you want to go to? Because you're not going home. And she told me. We went in, they took her directly into ER. First they diagnosed strokes, and then 10 days later, after a biopsy and MRIs and CAT scans and hospitalizations, they diagnosed stage 4 pancreatic cancer that had already spread to the liver. And that was March 16. She died April 10. And so basically they told me to take her home because there was nothing they could do. And you know, I've worked in hospital settings as a chaplain, and I knew that. When you say pancreatic cancer, unless the Lord intervenes, death is going to ensue. And so I took her home. And my job then was not only to work with family in order to manage meds and symptoms and keep her comfortable. And by the way, she did never have to use anything stronger than Advil or Tylenol until she went into a final coma like 2 days before her death,
Really?
which was a blessing. It was a very real blessing. But my job then was also to manage the countless number of people who wanted to come visit her. Family, friends, long-term acquaintances, and so did that. I had the opportunity also to talk to her about her impending death, and she had no fear, none whatsoever. I asked her if she was angry, which is a typical thing that people go through. She said, why would I be angry? I've had 60 years of immaculate health, and some people never get a day. I've had 40 years of a marvelous marriage and wonderful ministry, and some people never know that. She talked about her children, her grandchildren, her extended family and friends. She said, should I be angry with God because all of that lasted only 60 years and not 80? She said, that seems to be ungrateful, and I won't be ungrateful. And that was her attitude. Didn't surprise me that that was her attitude. And that's how she died, with that kind of comfort and that kind of confidence in her Lord.
Mike, I'm just thinking how she ministered to you at that very time
Yes, she did.
that you were trying to minister to her.
Yeah, she did.
And I forgot to introduce my counselors here, so let me do that just briefly. This is Rob Davison, about to be a licensed counselor from Maryland.
Yes.
True? So glad you're here. Nicole Parker, biblical counselor and university professor from Tennessee, Southern Adventist University. Paul Coneff, marriage and family therapist from somewhere in Texas. I don't remember where. Keene, Texas.
Keene, Texas. We're
It's a-
neighbors almost.
Well, yeah, I guess. So sorry, I didn't mean to break your flow here, but I forget these.
You got to get that in there.
Important
These are
people.
important people.
Yeah.
But no, you're right. She did minister to me. It didn't surprise me, though, that her attitude was what I just shared with you. What surprised me is that had been my attitude. Because
You were angry?
no, my attitude was the same as Gail's, that it was no anger, there was gratitude. And that's surprising because anger was my go-to emotion for most of my life. In order to survive, basically, because of my growing up situation, anger became a part of my life experience, and it was the thing that always saved me until it got too heavy to carry. And
Can
eventually
you
I had to do
unpack that a
something.
little, maybe?
Yeah,
Not too much?
when you live in a home of anger, you respond with anger.
I see.
And you can either be super compliant,
Uh-huh.
which says, I'm wrong, or you can be super angry, which says, you're wrong and I deserve better.
Uh-huh.
And actually, the anger was a healthier response for me, I think, because it said, I deserve better.
So you
than
were
this."
defiant.
I was defiant.
Hard to believe.
Yeah, well, you know, I have my moments. Hang around.
All right.
But, you know, I'd gone through another experience of loss of a different nature earlier and had experienced a great deal of depression over that.
Really?
And I was probably depressed for about 13 years until the irritant itself, and it's too long a story to tell, was finally removed. It wasn't anything I had done. It was a circumstance of life that was unfair. It had oppressed me and depressed me. Even though I was ministering and doing everything else and functioning, I knew I was depressed.
Well, we're going to be really curious about that. Can
Yeah,
you
of
give
course
us some
you
kind
are.
of
Of course you
nutshell
are.
version? You know, we're counselors here. We want to know the details.
Yeah.
Want to know more?
This is a financial loss that almost robbed me of my ministry. And it was not something that I had done.
Yeah.
It was, again, the circumstances are too long
Yeah.
to tell here.
Convoluted story.
It was a
but-
convoluted story of something I had not done. It didn't matter. I was culpable, apparently, and I had a huge financial loss. Thought I was going to not be able to minister ever again, and I responded with anger. And after this was finally removed and my ministry was restored, I did some soul searching and figured out that the reason for my anger was that I thought God had owed me better. And
Entitlement.
Yeah. And when I realized that I'd preached against the fact that God owes us
Yeah.
more,
Entitlement.
and yet I felt it, I confessed that as a sin, and I asked God to make my preached theology congruent with my lived theology.
Amen. Love it.
And when Gail was announced as being terminal, I had to thank God because he had done what I asked him to do. I did not think that God owed me more than what he had given me.
Huh.
I was grateful for what he had given me. And anger has not been a part of my grief experience at all because of that, I think.
Yeah.
I recognize I've been blessed beyond measure.
So
Blessed
that
beyond measure.
foundational entitlement just really sets you up for a lot of ramifications
Absolutely.
of it. You know, feeling cheated, feeling
Yes.
resentful, feeling
Yes.
anger. But if you can sort of knock that foundational thing out, then a lot of things fall into place.
Yeah, that's right.
Good. Yeah.
That's right.
That's
And so we faced her death with a shared attitude. Prior to her death, you know, I told her, you know, what I've done as a chaplain is I ask people to do life review because it puts their life in perspective. Do you need that? She said, no. I said, you're probably right. I said, all right, so what are we going to do? So she said, what I need to do is write letters to each of our children and grandchildren. So she couldn't do that, so I took dictation. We finished those.
Can you tell us a little about your family? How many kids?
I have 2 daughters, adult daughters, one of whom is married. So I have a son-in-law, 2 grandchildren.
And one of them is a counselor, right?
Yes, my younger daughter is a counselor.
It's in the blood.
It's in the blood. It's in the water. The other daughter started off as a teacher and is now a preacher. So, you know, again, it's in the blood because Gail and I both started off as teachers and turned into preachers, just like my older daughter.
Wow.
So she wrote these letters of goodbye to them that I was supposed to send to them 6 weeks after her death.
Yeah.
And then she said, I need to write one to you. I said, well, that's going to be awkward because I'm taking the dictation. I said, besides, what are you going to say to me you haven't said every day for the last 40 years? She said, well, you may be right. I said, but out of curiosity, what would you say to me? What would you say to
If
me?
you did write this,
Yeah, if you were going to write this letter,
If
what would
you
you
wrote the
say?
letter.
She said, I would say, first of all, no regrets. That's speaking of our marriage. She knew that I would beat myself up over my perceived mistakes in the marriage. She said, no regrets, no regrets. And second thing she
did
said.
that mean something to you?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
It did.
Did it surprise you at all, or?
No,
No.
because that's her. And that was one of our mantras, so to speak, our mottos for our marriage.
And maybe you were just awesome and didn't know it, you know?
Well, I know that I had to grow into being a good marriage partner because, you know, if you don't see it at home, you have to figure out what that means.
But
so-
but the good news is
Yeah.
you can.
Yeah, you can grow.
You
can
don't, I mean,
change.
it helps when
Yeah.
you're formatted to
Yeah.
love and be loved, but
Yeah.
if you didn't get that growing
Yeah.
up, but I think you did have a close relationship with your
My
mom.
mother and I were very close,
Very
very
close.
close, and she was just a sweetheart to me.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot from her.
Yeah.
But the second thing she said was live our life. And to me that meant faith, family, and ministry. Those are the 3 things. Because that had been the cornerstone of our life. Our faith in Christ, our family.
So she was kind of commissioning you going
Yeah.
forward, this is what
Yeah.
I want you to do.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
She said, that's what I would say is live our life. Don't try to make big changes. This is who we are. I mean, she realized that context of ministry will change, those kinds of things. Details will change, but ministry is a part of it. Faith, family, and ministry were the things she
Mike,
wanted me.
you're speaking to so many married couples right now who need to hear this,
Yeah.
as well as people who might be grieving. But this is beautiful.
Yeah, yeah.
Where
very
she's saying, keep living.
Yeah, exactly. And we had talked at earlier stages about if one of us died, would the other remarry? And I said, I don't know. She said, yeah, you will. I said, well, I don't know. She said, no, you'll remarry. Why? I said, you need a wife. You need a
A guy like you can't even
Yeah.
match your socks.
She knew that I needed that. I didn't realize that. And after she died at first, I didn't think I would ever remarry because
What
what I
did
had
she
was so
mean, though?
precious.
What kind of need? Like just to function or make your dinner, or was it more?
No, it's deeper than that. Although obviously I don't cook, so I need someone to make dinner. But you know, I have enough income. I can go to restaurants and I can, you know, things like that. But that's not what she meant. I think that men in particular find it difficult to have intimate relationships. Even guy friends, there's not a level of intimacy there with most of your guy friends. You like each other, you care for each other, but there's not a level of intimacy. There's only one person on the planet that I had that kind of intimate relationship with, and that was her. And she knew that I couldn't live without that kind of relationship. I would need to find someone with whom I could have an intimate relationship. Otherwise, I'm alone in the world. I didn't realize that fully until about 7 months in.
So women are
to my
more
grief experience.
naturally capable of forming relationships outside of marriage,
Yes.
but men kind of need that anchoring relationship to
My
keep
wife-
their relational.
Gail had deep relationships with her siblings, especially her sisters, deep relationships with girlfriends
Yeah.
that, I mean, they could share most anything. I didn't have that with anyone but Gail. That's the only person on the planet that I had that with.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
That was very wise of her.
Yeah, yeah. You know, as a minister, first of all, it makes you kind of fearful of being too vulnerable, too open to people. And so you have to learn vulnerability, and that takes some confidence.
You mean being a pastor makes it difficult to be open?
Yes.
Because you feel like people will use stuff against you?
They will use it against you. And you have to be willing to put up with that if you're going to be open and vulnerable.
Or you think they'll use it against you. It's not always that they will.
Not always.
But they might.
Most people won't, but some will. And
true.
when I stand up and I share intimate details of my life before people now in the pulpit or on camera, I get emails.
Yeah.
Some of which are supporting and others of which are not.
Not so much.
Not so much. So vulnerability, there's a price to be paid for it, and most men know that. The most intense negative emotion that men typically experience is shame. And to open your life up and to receive criticism multiplies the shame then.
I'm just wondering if these two gentlemen have the same experience where it's tough for you to get really close to someone other than your wife. Is it easier for you to access that? Is that pretty true?
I'm totally relating to what you're saying. Mike.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
not natural. And also, I agree with Mike that some people will be supportive, but there's always some people, they may wait 6 months or a year,
Yeah.
but something goes wrong, and then they're going to turn around and say, you're doing this because of
Yeah.
what you shared.
And
they're
so
reading into
because
it.
you guys typically occupy these positions where you're spearheading something or the head of something, you're especially vulnerable to people that will use your vulnerability
Absolutely.
against you.
Absolutely.
What do you think about that? This is kind of off topic, but what do you think about the whole bromance phenomena where guys like make these almost romantic, they're not homosexual, it's this phenomena where men are like, they make these overtures of a friendship nature to each other. It almost seems like pseudo intimacy though, because it's very public.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder if they carry that intimacy into private relationships, or
Well,
not.
are they really talking about heart-to-heart struggles?
Yeah, yeah.
And like Mike mentioned, shame, anger, are we really talking about those kind of
Yeah.
things and how they impact our life?
I doubt it, and I do think God made us in His image, male and female, and that we make unique contributions. And I think women are more wired relationally and tend to civilize men in certain respects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and again, I identify with what you're saying, and I do think that the bromance is more of a false intimacy. Men don't understand what intimacy means until a woman shows them.
Yeah. Yeah. In generally speaking.
Yeah, in general terms, and obviously that's a broad stroke,
Yeah,
but,
sure.
but that was true for me as well. And I thought I was a pretty open, pretty intimate kind of guy until I discovered true intimacy.
So was it Gail that was she was the secret sauce, or was it just what you went through together that enabled you to get to that level of intimacy?
I think it's a combination of all things. I think women have a greater intuitive sense of what intimacy should look like. And are constantly working to build that.
Yeah.
And then our shared life experiences, of course, adds to this.
Yeah.
And on it goes. All that together. No one knew me like she did.
Yeah.
She saw me in my most vulnerable and my worst times, and she saw me in my best times and chose to focus on the best.
Yeah.
That there was a level of intimacy and trust there that I had never known before. That was rich for me. And finally, as I began to grieve as I mentioned, about 7 months in, it dawned on me there was an event that took place which
When you say 7 months in, you mean into her?
into my grief.
Okay.
Because she wasn't 6-7 months,
She wasn't around for
No.
7 months. It's
no.
quick.
So about 7 months after her
Yeah.
death is when it began to dawn on me, I don't want to live this way. And it wasn't suicidal. It's just, how is the rest of my life going to look? Because I've never even had suicidal ideations. It's not a part of my DNA, apparently, at least not to this point in my life. But it was, how am I going to live the rest of my life? Do I want to live it like this?
Yeah.
And the answer was no.
We being alone.
Yeah, being alone.
So can we save the second chapter for the second segment? Because I want to unpack that during the second
Sure.
segment. But I want to look more at
Yeah.
the intimacy building process of your marriage, how you got there, because there are so many married couples that don't get there. Can you give us a little bit of your mad about marriage
Yeah,
And
I
maybe
think
you guys chime in.
I think that for me to find intimacy, the first thing was to recover from any negative from the past. That means to acknowledge what was negative in my past and how that had impacted my life and what I needed to do with it. So I began dealing with my anger issues early on in my marriage because I realized that anger, though it may have served me well in certain circumstances, was too heavy to carry and it would hurt my wife. And I didn't want to be a source of pain for her.
Did you ever see her get hurt by your anger?
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And it would be through a quick word, an angry word.
Just like short temper.
Yeah, short temper, angry word, or an attitude. And when I saw the pain that caused her, I realized I didn't want to do that to her. I didn't want to be the source of pain for her. I wanted to be the source of joy for her.
Because some people just get mad back and then it obfuscates the problem, compounds the problem.
Yeah, and that wasn't Gail. Gail didn't do that.
Did she grow up in a home where they just didn't handle
She
things that
grew
way?
up in Father Knows Best, Does God. It was Christian, it was Father Knows Best, the old 50s sitcom. It was an idyllic Americana home.
Really?
That's where she grew up.
Was
And
it Father Knows Best, like he was an autocrat, or was it more like it was just
Oh, he was a loving, godly
Oh,
man.
yeah, okay.
Grace-filled, who
Oh.
loved his children. They adored him.
Oh, wow.
And his wife adored him. They had a wonderful relationship. They raised their children to know Jesus.
That's amazing.
And it was an amazing home.
So she had certain tools that you didn't have.
Yeah, exactly. She had seen a good relationship up close and personal. And she understood intimacy intuitively as a woman and then experientially from the standpoint of her home. So she knew kind of where we needed to go. I didn't know. And as I began to humble myself and realize I could learn from her and dealt with my own stuff, then as we experienced life together, there are certain mottos that we establish between us in order to make this happen. The first motto was, my spouse will never intentionally hurt me. Because
I remember that.
yeah, that's an important motto for me because I lived up looking over my shoulder, wondering where the next hurt was coming from. And when I realized that she would never intentionally be the source of that pain, that I could trust her with that, then that meant that the guard goes down. So that was the first one. And then we had a second one we called goodwill marriage. And that is that I promised to want the best for her and for our relationship and to believe that she always wanted the best for me and our relationship.
You put the best construction on each other.
Exactly.
So if you had an off day, you weren't monstrified for that
That's
off
right.
day. Yeah.
That's right. Everybody has an off day or an off moment. But I realized that she would never intentionally hurt me. And so if I feel pain, then I would simply say, I know you wouldn't hurt me on purpose, but this felt this way to me. Can you explain to me what's going on?
So you had like a positive default that you would go back
Yes.
to if things didn't go
Exactly.
quite right. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's powerful.
So that helped heal me and build trust in me. And then as we experienced life's ups and downs, successes and failures, that grew the intimacy. And I also saw that even through the bad times, she held on to that motto for us, that mantra, I would never intentionally hurt you. She was faithful with that at every turn.
Don't you find that like in marriages there are narratives and the people have these baseline narratives like this is a disappointment, or this person has never been faithful to me, or there's no hope for this relationship, or this is a constant assault on my dignity, or whatever. And what we're seeing here, at least what I'm seeing, is a positive narrative. It's a positive, redemptive narrative. It doesn't mean that you don't have sin. It doesn't mean that you don't have struggles, but it means that you have this basic positive narrative. And it's this instructive to me because I can think of times in my marriage where we haven't had a positive narrative because I didn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
I had never seen that done before, and nobody was like teaching the kind of seminars that you teach, at least in the days that we struggled.
And sometimes, there are people watching this, I know, that can't honestly say that they believe their spouse will never intentionally hurt them. They've
That's right.
seen
You have to both make that true.
solid evidence to the contrary. But for those who can honestly say that, it's a beautiful gift to bring to a marriage. And when you can't have that honest confidence, what can you do in a marriage? Like, what do you recommend to people? You're doing these seminars all the time. What do you find when people can't honestly say that?
I think
Good
that you
question.
have to come to a point in your life where you decide that your partner's dysfunction is not going to produce dysfunction in you. That you choose to do the right thing all the time, whether it has a positive benefit or not, because you can never afford the luxury of believing a lie or engaging in an unhealthy act.
Yeah.
You just can't.
The power of sin is that when one person sins against the other person, it tempts the other person to sin in response. And so we set these cycles of sin going in our families, first in our marriages, and then
You got it.
pass it on to our children. And the way we stop that is by committing ourselves to righteousness, to loving well, no matter whether the other person loves us well.
You got it.
I call that going vertical. You know, you don't have to react to something perpetrated on you. You can go vertical and stop that cycle.
That's right.
And that doesn't mean you have to stay in an abusive
No, it does not.
relationship.
It does
Sometimes
not.
loving them well means the opposite. You say,
And there's a
"That's
difference
enough."
between abuse and dysfunction.
Yeah.
Right,
And so the fact that you stay in a dysfunctional marriage may be God honoring.
right.
Yes, exactly.
The fact that you stay in an abusive marriage honors no one.
Might be a really bad idea.
Right.
That's right, because your kids get mad at you for it.
Exactly.
You could get hurt. You know,
Exactly.
there's a whole list of reasons.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. Do you think that we're somewhat, and I hate to get into the range where people accuse me of blaming the victim, but do you think that we're somewhat responsible for bringing out the best in other people? Because what I see in marriage is often people will be like, this person is so terrible to me, they're so terrible to me,
Yeah.
this is so, and they have no sense of responsibility. Maybe if you put them on their best behavior and you gave them a 10, maybe they would reach maybe an 8, but there seems to be no sense of responsibility. So a lot of what I do is try to get people back to that internal locus of control where they're like, well, maybe they're having their own sin issues, but I'm going to make sure to try to bring the best out of them.
Heard a story about a woman who wanted to divorce her husband. And the pastor said, you know, well, you can do that, but why do you want to do this? She said, I want to hurt him. He said, here's a better way to do that. For the next 6 months, be the wife he's always dreamed of. Absolutely always dreamed of. And then when he falls absolutely in love with you, that's when you divorce him and hurt him.
It's the best
She
way
said,
to hurt him.
okay.
I'll
So
do it.
6 months, she was idyllic. I mean, the perfect wife. At the end of the 6 months, he said, now you're going to divorce him? She said, absolutely not. I love him.
We're having the greatest time of our life.
That's right. That's right. Because her changed behavior changed his behavior. And so, yes, we have a responsibility. There's a line, though. I think, again, it comes
abuse.
between the difference between a dysfunctional marriage
That's right.
and an abusive marriage. Because in an abusive marriage, your changed behavior affects nothing. Nothing. But a dysfunctional marriage, it can change someone.
You know, I really wish we had more time to unpack this whole thing of abuse and what distinguishes between an abusive and a
Yeah.
dysfunctional marriage. And maybe we'll open that up during the second segment. We never know where these things are going to
Who
go.
knows?
But exactly, this is a free-for-all. But we're so excited to hear this story, and it's comforting to me to see grief handled with dignity. But even more than that, the beauty of a relationship that was really forged, built on love, and you developed intimacy, and you didn't have the background that she had, but you were able to learn things, and that's so encouraging. And I know there's people out there that are wondering what's going to turn the tables in their relationship. There's hope. While there's life, there's hope. Keep watching, keep learning, keep listening, and things just may change.